Good morning and welcome to a new year on This Week. As we start this new year, President Trump is facing a new reality in Washington, dealing with divided government for the first time. Consequences just starting to play out with new investigations coming in the House. Robert Mueller preparing his report. And the watchword right now, stalemate. Day 16 of the government shutdown, no deal in sight to get 800,000 federal workers back to work and paid. The border wall promise that fueled Donald Trump's campaign has now stalled the government he leads. Placeholder talks at the White House on Saturday made no progress. Another meeting set later today. One big question on the table, will President Trump defy Congress by declaring a national emergency and ordering the military to build the wall he vowed Mexico would pay for? Let's take that now to one of Washington's newer power brokers, the incoming chair of the House Armed Services Committee, Adam Smith of Washington. Congressman, thank you for joining us this morning. Let's get right to it. Does President Trump have the ability, have the authority to declare a national emergency, have the military build his wall?
Well, unfortunately, the short answer is yes. There is a provision in law that says the president can declare an emergency. It's been done a number of times, but primarily it's been done to build facilities in Afghanistan and Iraq. And in this case, I think the president would be wide open to a court challenge saying, where's the emergency? You have to establish that in order to do this. But beyond that, this would be a terrible use of Department of Defense dollars. The president spends most of his time talking about how we're not spending enough on national security. Now he wants to take $20 billion out of the defense budget to build a wall, which, by the way, is not going to improve our border security. The president seems unaware of this, but we've actually already built a wall across much of the border. And all border security experts that I talk to say where a wall makes sense, it's already been built. We should have a conversation about national security, about border security. But first, we should reopen the government and start paying our Border Patrol agents and the other 800,000 federal employees who are furloughed.
We saw the Chief of Staff, White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, now say the president is willing to give on a concrete wall. He wants it to be steel instead. Are they giving you something you can work with there?
No, I mean, because the president really doesn't understand the issue. And actually, there was a great quote from Mulvaney from a couple years ago where he said, he was critical of then candidate Trump's comments about a wall, saying, look, a wall is sort of a childish response to the problem. If you understand what's happened in border security, we've like quintupled the border security budget in the last 15 years. And by the way, it's been fairly effective, but we've invested in Border Patrol agents. We've invested in drones, in airplanes, in sensors, in technology. A concrete barrier is not going to automatically stop people from coming.
Democrats have supported some barriers, and the president's out tweeting this morning. He said, he's quoting Senator Barack Obama in 2005, we simply cannot allow people to pour into the United States undetected, undocumented, unchecked. And then I voted when I was a senator to build a barrier to try to prevent illegal immigrants from coming in. Right. That's Hillary Clinton. So you voted for barriers in the past. So any concern that this hard line is going to backfire?
Well, no, because, and that's the point. The wall is not in itself a bad idea. It's just, it's been done. And what the president has not done is he has not made the case that on the portions of the border where a wall has not been built, how is a wall going to actually enhance border security? There is no evidence whatsoever that that's necessary, and yet he's willing to shut down the government and stop paying Border Patrol agents, and in many cases, stop all the efforts that we have made to enhance border security over a campaign promise. And a campaign promise, as you pointed out, that Mexico was supposed to pay for. He is shutting down the government to break his signature campaign promise.
Let's talk about
the campaign promise was that the taxpayers weren't going to have to pay for it.
Let's talk about the broader agenda. You said you want to hold hearings in the Armed Services Committee on President Trump's politicization of the military. What does that mean exactly, and who will you call?
Well, what we've seen is when the president talks to troops, I mean, he has campaign rallies when he's talking to troops. I don't think you should use the military to advance your agenda. Every other president before this, when they've worked with the military, when they've talked to the troops, it's been about national security. It's been about their service. But when President Trump talks, it's about his campaign, about how bad the Democrats are. We need civilian control of the military, and we need to separate those things. But the main thing that I want to focus focus on in the hearings that we have coming up once we get our committee set is transparency and oversight. Why did the president send 5,600 troops, active duty troops, to the border? What was the purpose of it? What is his policy in Syria and Afghanistan as he's now talking about pulling out? There's been a lack of transparency and an explanation for what his national security strategy is. We want to make sure that the officials at the Pentagon and the White House let Congress know and that we work together to develop a coherent national security strategy.
You mentioned Syria. We all know that the former Defense Secretary James Mattis, General Mattis, resigned in protest. And part of the Syria decision also made it clear he could no longer go along with the president's approach to treating our allies and dealing with our adversaries. Will you call former Secretary Mattis?
I would like to. Now, I understand and I respect that a president has a right to private counsel from his top advisors. I'm not going to call former Secretary Mattis to say, what did the president say about this? What did he do about that? But Secretary Mattis is one of the most knowledgeable, capable experts we have on defense policy and foreign policy. His views on what we should be doing around the world would be invaluable for members of our committee. So we'd love to get his perspective on a wide variety of issues.
And what should we be doing in Syria right now? The president announced he wanted to withdraw, but we just saw the National Security Advisor John Bolton today say that the United States now is not going to withdraw our troops until Turkey promises to protect the Kurds, until we're certain that ISIS is defeated. Do you know what the policy is right now, and do you support it?
I don't think anybody knows what the policy is right now. And that's part of the problem, and what I think Secretary Mattis did a decent job. Our allies matter enormously, and the president treats them like dirt. He insults them regularly, does not consult them, makes radical decisions via Twitter, and then changes his mind the next day. Look, the world is big and complicated. The U.S. is not going to be able to do everything on our own. We need allies. We need people to support us. He's alienated them across the board. And in Syria, the 2 points that John Bolton made are obvious. Those are the two big concerns we have. We don't want ISIS to rise again and be a transnational terrorist threat, and we don't want our allies, the Kurds, to be slaughtered by Erdogan in Turkey. I mean, that was obvious how many ever weeks ago it was when President Trump, apparently on a whim, tweeted out, "We're getting out of Syria." So, I'm pleased that John Bolton has recognized the national security interest, but that's what we want to have on the Armed Services Committee. Not a tweet going, let's get out of Syria. Let's have a discussion about all the different pieces that are necessary to meet U.S. national security interests and make an informed decision.
Finally, let's talk about impeachment. A couple of your Democratic colleagues have already filed articles of impeachment in the House. We also saw your new colleague, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib of Michigan, say this. That's the cleaned up version of what she said, right, to move on. What was your reaction to that? And are you concerned the Democrats may be pushing this too far, too fast?
I don't think we're pushing it too far, too fast. The Congresswoman represents a constituency that has every right to be very angry at President Trump. And many politicians throughout the history, in fact, I think Vice President Cheney very famously used a similar word to Senator Patrick Leahy on the floor of the United States Senate. People get passionate about their politics, so I don't think it makes a great deal of difference exactly how she said it. I wouldn't have said it that way, but the most important point here is impeachment is an unbelievably serious undertaking. No president has ever been removed from office. And if you do this, you are substituting the judgment of the voters for the judgment of Congress. Now, if the crimes are serious enough, it needs to be done. But we need to be very deliberate, very serious, and very careful about how we do this, mindful that the president will not be removed from office unless 67 senators affirm or convict on the impeachment. So we need to see Mueller's report, and we need to make a very, very strong case if there is one to be made. This is not something that should be rushed or done hastily, but it's a serious obligation of Congress. If the president has committed the crimes that we've seen considerable evidence that he has committed, we need to take that seriously. But it's something that we're going to have to wait for Mueller's report and do it in a serious way.
Congressman, thanks for your time this morning. Let's bring in now the new chair of the House Republican Congress, Congresswoman Liz Cheney. Congresswoman, thanks for joining us this morning. You just heard your colleague invoke your father in this debate over vulgarity and impeachment. And I know you've said this, that some of the rhetoric you've seen over the last week shows the Democrats are radical and out of touch. But do you think this is something you all can push successfully given the president's own record?
Hey, George. Well, thanks for having me on. You know, I think that the key thing about what we heard from the Congresswoman this week is the fact that she's, very focused on a politically motivated impeachment. I think what Adam Smith was saying in terms of the seriousness of impeachment is absolutely true. And so, I think we've got to all look at exactly what the Democrats plan to do here. You had Speaker Pelosi in her remarks accepting the speakership talk about the importance of working across the aisle to get things done. And then just a mere few hours later, you had video of Congresswoman Tlaib. So, look, I think that at the end of the day, they need to understand and recognize that impeachment is not a political thing. It never should be, that it tears at the very fabric of our Constitution if it is. And to be pronouncing on that issue, just having been sworn in without having any evidence at all can't be anything but political. So I think that's the key thing in terms of what we saw over the course of the last few days.
Let's talk about the shutdown. You just heard Congressman Smith say that he does believe the president does have the power, the legal authority, to declare a national emergency, have the military build the wall. Should he invoke it?
Nobody wants him to invoke it, and I don't believe the president wants to invoke it. We all hoped, frankly, that once Speaker Pelosi had secured the votes to become speaker on the floor, that her willingness to negotiate would, be more evident, that she would be willing to come to the table to do what's right for the American people. Unfortunately, what we've seen over the last few days is she's very much just completely captive to the far left of her party. And so where I was interested to hear my colleague on the Armed Services Committee, Congressman Smith, talk about the fact that there already is a wall, but that's a very different point than the one that Speaker Pelosi continues to make, which is that a wall's immoral. What we believe in the Republican side of the House is what's immoral is not to secure our borders, not to protect the people of this nation. The president has no more important obligation. Those of us who are elected officials in Congress have no more important obligation. We absolutely have got to secure the borders. And at this point, the Democrats continue to play games. There were meetings yesterday where Secretary Nielsen was able to lay out the security concerns at the border, the very real security concerns, drugs, crime, human trafficking, and we're hopeful there's going to be another meeting again today. But we've got to see the games stop. And this is not an issue of, who's doing what and who has the upper hand. The border has got to be secured. That's what the American people want to see, and they want the partisanship to end.
And you saw Congressman Smith say that he believes the Democrats have paid attention to border security. How do you answer his broader point that the president is asking the American taxpayers to pay for a campaign promise he broke, that Mexico would pay for the wall?
The president has talked about that. The president has talked about the extent to which we're going to see increased economic benefit from the renegotiated trade agreements with Mexico. But I'm sure that the Democrats are not taking the position that we should sit by and do nothing. I can't believe that that's a position that they plan to take to the voters. So I think especially when you look at the fact that in the past, many of them, including their current leadership, have voted for a barrier, for a wall, for border security, have bragged about the fact that they've done that. There's no question but that when you've got caravans, when you've got illegal immigrants, when you've got our Border Patrol agents being attacked, when you've got our Border Patrol agents asking for enhanced security at the border, including a wall, including barriers, that's what we ought to be doing. And we really need to stop playing these political games and just get it done.
Well, they would say they're ready to approve at least $1 billion in border security. It does seem that there's right now some breaks in the Republican ranks. 3 Republican senators have now said they want the government to open first, and then you can continue negotiations. Your own colleague in the House, Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick, says it's Congress's basic job to fund the government. This should happen on a different track. What's your answer to that?
It is our job to fund the government, and it is also our job to make sure that we secure the border, to make sure that we provide for the security of the nation. And the Democrats, could any moment now, they control now the floor of the House. So instead of playing games where they strip out one bill and strip out another bill and try to play, partisanship on the floor of the House, they ought to do what they've agreed to do in the past, and that is provide the appropriations to secure the border. We've got a huge number of critically important national security issues we're facing. This is one of them. We're facing a huge challenge from China, from Russia, from Iran, from ISIS. We need to be in a position where we can turn our attention to those, where we can make sure that we've got the border secured and that we're doing everything possible to provide the security the nation needs as a whole and stop with the political games.
The president talked about national security this week as well. We just heard Congressman Smith on Syria. I want to show what the president said in the cabinet meeting about Afghanistan.
Russia used to be the Soviet Union. Afghanistan made it Russia, because they went bankrupt fighting in Afghanistan. The reason Russia was in Afghanistan was because terrorists were going into Russia. They were right to be there.
Russia right to be in Afghanistan?
No. Obviously, I disagree with the president's assessment of the history there. The Soviets went into Afghanistan as part of the Brezhnev Doctrine. They were determined to spread communism around the globe. And what bankrupted the Soviet Union was Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan and his determination to support those who were fighting on behalf of freedom around the globe, to fight back against the Soviet communists, and also his determination to build the Strategic Defense Initiative to bankrupt the Soviets by forcing them to have to put more and more resources into their military. So I think at the end of the day, that's clearly what bankrupted the Soviet Union, and that's they were in Afghanistan because they were, very much adherents to the Brezhnev Doctrine. But I would also say, when I listened to my colleague, Congressman Smith, talk about what the Armed Services Committee is going to be focused on, I really do hope that he will not direct the committee to be focused simply on, political attacks on President Trump. I think that we as a nation face too many huge challenges, and it is certainly the role of the House Armed Services Committee to conduct oversight, but it's also, as we do that, our role to make sure that the Defense Department is doing everything it needs to do to modernize. I am certainly hopeful that we will not see Congressman Smith support cutting the defense budget. We've just begun to rebuild after the devastation of the Obama years, and we've got to continue on that trajectory and on that path. We face tremendous challenges from adversaries who have got weapon systems we cannot defend against, and we will be falling down in our duty if we fail to do what's right, to make sure we're conducting oversight and appropriations to continue to keep the nation safe.
Is the administration in the right place now on Syria?
I've said that the United States should not pull out of Syria. I've been very hopeful, as I've seen reports that we are now going to slow that down. We've got about 2,200 special operations forces there, and they are conducting crucially important work in terms of air support, in terms of artillery support. It is their presence that has really helped the Kurds be effective in terms of the battle against ISIS, and it would be really devastating if we were to pull out precipitously, and if we were to have a situation where the Iranians were given free rein to really establish a land bridge there and control and dominate Syria. That would be counter to our interests. It would allow ISIS to begin to again form safe havens potentially, and it would not serve the interests of our ally Israel and others in the region. So I'm hopeful that we will in fact slow that down, and that we will look at conditions on the ground and not make a precipitous withdrawal.
Congresswoman, thanks for your time this morning.
Thanks, George.